Hi friends, good morning. Welcome to T1 Academy. Myself Dr. M. Harinath Reddy, teaching Indian Polity and Constitution. We all know that we have UPSC Prelims exam on 27th May. So to help the students, those who are preparing for UPSC Prelims 2025, we started this rapid revision classes for Indian Polity and Constitution. So in that a series of videos, this is the first video on rapid revision of Indian polity classes, and when we rapidly revise the Indian polity, we also try to simultaneously cover the most important current affairs which are there in the news in the last 1 year. So today in this video, let's begin with the first topic, constitutional development. So under historical background, how the constitution of independent India, which came into force on 26th January 1950. We all know that the Constitution of India came into force on 26th January 1950. So this Constitution of India of 1950 has borrowed more than 40 to 50% of the provisions from Government of India Act 1935. So that's why there was a criticism that the Constitution of India is a carbon copy of Government of India Act 1935. So the Constitution of 1950 has evolved over a period of time, and this we discuss under constitutional development. So from Regulating Act of 1773, from the Regulating Act of 1773 till Indian Independence Act 1947. So this is the period in which the constitution under the British has grown, and this formed the basis for the Constitution of 1950. Under this constitutional development under the British rule can be broadly classified into two categories, into two phases. So from 1773 till 1857, so this is the phase 1. So in this period from 1773 to 1858, India was under the administration of English East India Company. English East India Company, which is the trading body from United Kingdom, was entrusted with the responsibility of administration from the Regulating Act of 1773 to 1858. This is phase 1. The second phase is administration under the British Crown. So after the Great Revolt of 1857, the rule of English East India Company was ended, and in the place of the rule of English East India Company, the rule of British Crown was started. So this is the second phase. So the first legislation under the rule of the British Crown, the Act for Better Government of India 1858. So this is the beginning of the British Crown rule, and it ended with the Indian Independence Act of 1947. So these are the two phases. And then in these two phases, let's begin with the first phase, rule of English East India Company. See, under the rule of English East India Company, we will try to discuss the most important features which are important for the exam. We can't go into all the details, then it will be not a rapid revision. So if you take the first one, the Regulating Act of 1773. See, the background for enactment of Regulating Act of 1773 by the British Parliament is linked with the Robert Clive's dual government. Robert Clive's dual government. So we all know that after the Battle of Plassey in 1757 and subsequently after the Battle of Buxar 1764, from 1765 to 1772, in Bengal there is a kind of government called dual government, which is called Robert Clive's dual government. Under this dual government in Bengal, remember it is the province of Bengal which was conquered by the Britishers for the first time. The first province in India which was conquered by the Britishers is Bengal. Bengal is the richest province by then. So under Robert Clive's dual government, Diwani functions were with the Britishers. What do you mean by Diwani functions? Diwani functions means the power to collect the land revenue, it was with the Britishers. Then the Nijamat functions, that is maintenance of law and order. Maintenance of law and order in the province of Bengal was entrusted to the Nawab of Bengal. So this dual government is called Robert Clive's famous dual government. So Diwani functions are with the Britishers, the collection of land revenue. Nijamat functions, maintenance of law and order in the province of Bengal was with the Nawab of Bengal. So this is called famously as a dual government of Robert Clive. So in this period from 1765 to 1772, because of the corrupt rule of Robert Clive, Bengal suffered like anything. So the English East India Company, which is the trading body which I told you, the servants, the officers of English East India Company, they got indulged in private trade and they are making lot of money at the cost of English East India Company. So the English East India Company went into losses and has become bankrupt because the servants of English East India Company, instead of working for the profits of English East India Company, they got engaged in the private trade that affected the profits of English East India Company. But individually the servants of English East India Company became very rich. So this finally forced English East India Company to go to the British Parliament to take loans from the British Parliament. So this gave an opportunity for the British Parliament to regulate, to control the affairs of English East India Company. So this is the background in which the British Parliament has enacted the Regulating Act of 1773. That is the first legislation. See, under the Regulating Act of 1773, the most important features are the Governor of Bengal was designated as the Governor General of Bengal. The governors of Bombay and Madras were subordinated to the Governor General of Bengal. And then the Court of Directors was created to look after the commercial functions of English East India Company. So these are the important features. In addition to that, the Regulating Act of 1773 has provided for the establishment of an Executive Council. This Executive Council contained total of 4 members with a president or the chairman. So in the very beginning, the Executive Council has combined in itself both functions of executive and legislature. It is not only the lawmaking body, but it is also the body which implements the laws made by itself. So in the very beginning, the functions of the executive and legislature were not separated. They were combined in one institution, that is the Executive Council. So the Executive Council is not only the law maker, it is also the implementer of the laws made by itself. So to look after the administration of entire country, which by then is under the British control, a body was created in Bengal which is called the Executive Council with 4 members, and the head is president or the chairman. Then there was one more institution which was created under the Regulating Act of 1773. This is called the Supreme Court. Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court of Calcutta was also created under the Regulating Act of 1773. Remember, please do remember, the Supreme Court which was created under the Regulating Act of 1773 is totally different from the Supreme Court which we have today. The Supreme Court of today is a federal court. The Supreme Court of Calcutta, which was created under the Regulating Act of 1773, is not a federal court. So this Supreme Court was created to deal with the corruption of the servants of English East India Company. These are the major provisions under the Regulating Act of 1773. Then in 1784, we have one more legislation, Pitt's India Act of 1784. Pitt's India Act of 1784. So the name Pitt is taken from the then Prime Minister of United Kingdom, William Pitt. So that's the reason why the then Prime Minister is William Pitt. So the name is taken by this legislation, Pitt's India Act of 1784. So the most important provision of the Pitt's India Act of 1784 is it has provided for the establishment of a new body in London which is called the Board of Control. Board of Control. So now under the Regulating Act of 1773 we had already Court of Directors. Under the Pitt's India Act of 1784, we have created a new body called the Board of Control. So Pitt's India Act of 1784 has laid the foundations for the yet another kind of dual government, because Court of Directors looked after the commercial functions of English East India Company, Board of Control looked after the administrative functions of English East India Company. This is also called dual government. So we have one dual government between 1765 and 1772, that is by Robert Clive. This is the second kind of dual government from 1784. It continued up to 1858. That's the importance of Pitt's India Act of 1784. Then the next most important legislation, we have the Charter Act of 1813. Charter Act of 1813. See, the most important provision of Charter Act of 1813 is, see, since 1600 till 1830, from United Kingdom, only the English East India Company is allowed to do trade with India, which means English East India Company has got monopoly to trade with India. So this monopoly was ended through the Charter Act of 1813. The Charter Act of 1813 was very important because the monopoly of English East India Company in doing trade with India was ended. But here there are exceptions. Trade in tea and trade with China. So doing trade in tea and doing trade with China, these are the two areas where the monopoly of English East India Company was continued. So with the exception of tea trade and trade with China, the monopoly of English East India Company was ended, which means from United Kingdom, from now onwards, along with English East India Company, anyone can come and do trade with India. That's the point. Then the next important legislation, the Charter Act of 1833. The Charter Act of 1833 is again very important for several reasons. The first reason is, even in the areas of tea trade and trade with China, the monopoly of English East India Company, which was continued from 1813, was ended in 1833. So in 1833, the monopoly of English East India Company to do trade in tea and to do trade with China was ended. Then the next important feature of the Charter Act of 1833 is legislative centralization. Legislative centralization. So which means till 1833, Madras and Bombay provinces, they were making laws for themselves. Bengal is making laws for itself. So the law making powers were with the respective provinces. But the Charter Act of 1833, it has centralized the law making powers, which means the Governor General of Bengal, was designated as Governor General of India through the Charter Act of 1833. So there was a change in the name of the Governor General of Bengal. Earlier, from 1773 till 1833, we had this name Governor General of Bengal. So the first Governor General of Bengal is Warren Hastings. Through the Charter Act of 1833, the designation of Governor General of Bengal was changed to Governor General of India. Lord William Bentinck is the first Governor General of India. So from now onwards, both for Bengal and also for Madras and Bombay, the law making powers are concentrated, centralized in the Governor General of India. So that's one reason why the Charter Act of 1833 is very important. So there is legislative centralization. Governor General of Bengal became Governor General of India, and Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. And then trade in tea, trade with China, the monopoly of English East India Company was ended. These are the three important things about Charter Act of 1833. Then the next one, Charter Act of 1853. See, the Charter Act of 1853 is important for one important reason, that is, for the first time, the legislative functions of the Executive Council were separated from the executive functions. As I said, from 1773 till 1853, law-making functions as well as executive functions were performed by the same body, that is Executive Council. In 1853, under the Charter Act of 1853, a separate body was created for the purpose of lawmaking. This is called Legislative Council. So, a Legislative Council was newly created and carved out of the Executive Council. From now onwards, executive functions and legislative functions were demarcated. So, that is the importance of Charter Act of 1853. And then, as I told you, in 1857 we had the Great Revolt, which shook the foundations of the British Empire. So, this led to ending the rule of English East India Company and taking over of the administration by the British Crown. So, this is the phase 1. So, the phase 1 is from 1773 to 1858. I said the rule of English East India Company continued from 1773 to 1858. The phase 1 ended. The second phase is the rule of British Crown. In that, the first legislation is the Act for Better Government of India, 1858. So, under the rule of the British Crown, the first important legislation which we have to discuss is the Act for Better Government of India, 1858. And significant changes were made in this legislation when it comes to administrative structure. The first change which was brought in is, I said earlier we have Court of Directors and Board of Control. So, this dual government was ended. Board of Control was abolished and the Court of Directors was confined to the commercial functions of the English East India Company. So, in the place of Board of Control and Court of Directors, we have a new body which was created, which was called the Office of Secretary of State for India. The Office of Secretary of State for India. So, this man, the Secretary of State for India, was a member of the British Cabinet who is in charge of the affairs of India. So, the Indian affairs were looked after in the British Cabinet by a minister called the Secretary of State for India. And this is the new office which was created under the Act for Better Government of India, 1858. And this office is located in London, not in Delhi. And to give advice to the Secretary of State for India, one more body was created again in London, which was called the Council of India. Council of India. Earlier there were questions in the prelims exam asking where is the Council of India located. Council of India is not located in Delhi, it is located in London. So, Council of India is an advisory body to advise the Secretary of State for India. So, in addition to these two changes, in India, the Governor General of India, the designation of the Governor General of India was changed to Viceroy cum Governor General of India. We all know that the entire Indian subcontinent was divided broadly into two parts when we were under the British rule. One is British India, which is directly under the control of Britishers. The second one is the princely states, the native kingdoms. So, here when the Governor General of India administered British India, he was called the Governor General of India. But when he dealt with the princely states as a representative of the British Crown, he is called the Viceroy. So, the designation is Viceroy cum Governor General. Viceroy cum Governor General. So, the first Viceroy is Lord Canning. The first Viceroy is Lord Canning. Then after the Act for Better Government of India, 1858, the next important legislation was Councils Act of 1861. Indian Councils Act of 1861. Indian Councils Act of 1861. This legislation is again important for several reasons. One is the legislative centralization which happened in 1833 was undone in 1861. So, the Indian Councils Act of 1861 provided for legislative decentralization, which means the lawmaking powers of the British Indian provinces was restored. This is one very important feature. The next one is Lord Canning, who was the Governor General of India and Viceroy by then, he has come up with a system called a portfolio system, which means The burden of administration before the Executive Council is divided into a number of departments. Each member of the Executive Council was made head of one department. The routine matters of that particular department is looked after by the member of the Executive Council. And the more important matters were decided by the Governor General of India along with the Executive Council. So this system, it is called the portfolio system, which means a division of labor. The burden of administration was divided among the members of the Executive Council through the portfolio system. This is again very, very, very important because it laid the foundations for the modern cabinet system of government. So the portfolio system, which was given a legal recognition through the Indian Councils Act of 1861, was the basis for today's cabinet system of government. We say that India has parliamentary democracy today in India. One important feature of parliamentary democracy is the cabinet system of government. So in the cabinet system of government, the executive functions are performed by a body called the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. So this body is called the cabinet. A group of ministers called the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister is conferred the executive power. So the Indian Councils Act of 1861 was important for laying the foundations for the cabinet system of government. In addition to that, for the first time, Indians were associated in the work of lawmaking. So 3 Indians were made members of the Central Legislative Council to participate in the process of lawmaking. So in addition to this, today governors have the power to issue ordinances when there is urgency. So the power of the governor to issue ordinance in the absence of the legislature, this power was given for the first time under the Indian Councils Act of 1861. Indian Councils Act of 1861 was important for one more reason, because the power of the governor to issue ordinances if there is any emergency when the legislature is not in session, this power was conferred on the governor for the first time under the Indian Councils Act of 1861. So this power is being continued even today. That is the importance of Indian Councils Act of 1861. Then the next important legislation, straight away we have Minto-Morley reforms. Minto-Morley reforms, or this is also called the Government of India Act 1909. So one very important feature of the Minto-Morley reforms or the Government of India Act 1909 is it laid the foundations for separate electorates. Today in post-independent India, we have the concept of joint electorate. A seat may be reserved for Dalit, a seat may be reserved for the tribal community, but all the people in that constituency will vote for that candidate. But under separate electorates, if a seat is reserved for Muslims, only the Muslims are allowed to exercise the right to vote in choosing the Muslim elected representatives. So Minto-Morley reforms or the Government of India Act 1909 is notorious for introducing the separate electorates for Muslims. So by introducing separate electorates for Muslims, this law tried to divide the Indians and weaken the national movement. So this is an attempt at dividing Hindus and Muslims coming together and giving a strong resistance to the Britishers within India. So that's one important reason why the Minto-Morley reforms is important, separate electorates. And remember, this idea of separate electorates, it finally led to partition of India and creation of Pakistan in 1947. Then the second reason why the Minto-Morley reforms is important is because of earlier Indians were associated in the process of lawmaking. They were made members of the Central Legislative Council. But under the Minto-Morley reforms of 1909, for the first time, an Indian was made a member of the Viceroy's Executive Council. And this man is S.P. Sinha. Satyendra Prasad Sinha was the first Indian to become the member of Viceroy's Executive Council. So these are the two important features of Minto-Morley reforms. The next one is Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. See, Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, also called as Government of India Act 1919. So under Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, the most important feature is diarchy. So under the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, the subjects of administration are divided into 3 categories: Federalist, provincial list and a concurrent list. So under the provincial list, there were 50 subjects in the provincial list. These 50 subjects were broadly categorized into two categories: reserved items, transferred items, which means at the provincial level, reserved items were administered by the members of the Executive Council, transferred items were administered by the Indian ministers. So this led to a dual government at the provincial level, that is called diarchy. Diarchy was a miserable failure because the members of the Executive Council who are in charge of reserved items and the Indian ministers who are in charge of transferred items, they did not work together. So that's the reason why diarchy has failed. The other reason why the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms is very important is it has laid for the first time foundations for bicameral parliament at the union level. So what do you mean by bicameralism? So bicameralism, it refers to two houses in the legislature. For example, Indian Parliament today is bicameral. We have an upper house which is called Rajya Sabha or the Council of States. We have Lok Sabha, which is the lower house, that is the lower house. So Indian Parliament is bicameral. There are two houses. Similarly, in the states like Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, we have again two houses. Upper house is Council, Legislative Council. The lower house is called Legislative Assembly. So for the first time at the union level, the legislature became bicameral under the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Then the next important legislation is Government of India Act 1935. Government of India Act 1935. See, Government of India Act 1935, it provided for the establishment of an All India Federation for the first time. So the idea of federation was something which is very important under Government of India Act 1935. Then at the provincial level, fully elected governments were allowed, which means provincial autonomy. At the provincial level, an elected government is in place. So that's one important feature. Second important feature. Then diarchy, which was at the provincial level, was brought at the union level under the Government of India Act 1935. In addition to this, the Government of India Act 1935 also provided for the establishment of Reserve Bank of India. It also provided for the establishment of Federal Court. It also provided for the establishment of Federal Public Service Commission, Provincial Public Service Commission, Joint Public Service Commission. So these are the most important features under the Government of India Act 1935. In addition to this, the Council of India was abolished and a new office called the Office of British High Commissioner was created. This is to reduce the powers of the Secretary of State for India. So these are the important features of the Government of India Act 1935. The last legislation, Indian Independence Act of 1947. Indian Independence Act 1947. So this Indian Independence Act 1947 provided for the creation of two dominions, India and Pakistan. So each of these two dominions were to have constituent assemblies which are fully sovereign, which means the Constituent Assembly for India and Pakistan are a supreme in making a constitution of their choice, and they are also given the power to repeal any legislation which was made till then by the British Parliament. So in other words, Indian Independence Act of 1947 provided for partition of India into two nations, India and Pakistan. In addition to this, the Lord Mountbatten was made the last Governor General of India. Lord Mountbatten was made the last Governor General of India, and then it ended the British paramountcy in India. So that in other words, the British government from United Kingdom lost its power in administering the territories of India and Pakistan. It provided for the establishment of an interim government, and the Constituent Assembly which was created for enacting a constitution for the dominion of India will have dual functions. The Constituent Assembly will on one hand prepare the constitution for independent India. It will also act as a temporary parliament, a provisional parliament. So these are the important features of Indian Independence Act of 1947. So with this, we have done under the company rule, we have discussed all these important legislation. Then under the Crown Rule, all these important legislations were discussed. So with this, we ended the topic of historical background on the development of the Constitution under the British rule. Remember, the Constitution which has grown in India from 1773 till 1947, it has laid the foundations for the present Constitution which is under implementation in India. So that's it about constitutional development under the British rule. Let's get into the next topic, making of the Constitution. So in this making of the Constitution, let us focus on these following areas. So when the demand for a Constituent Assembly was made, composition of the Constituent Assembly, working of the Constituent Assembly, committees of the Constituent Assembly, enactment of the Constitution, enforcement of the Constitution, export committee of the Congress, criticism of the Constituent Assembly. So when it comes to making of Indian Constitution through the Constituent Assembly, for the first time, the idea of Constituent Assembly was given in 1935 by M.N. Roy. So the idea of Constituent Assembly was given by M.N. Roy in 1935. Later on in the same year, Indian National Congress has demanded to constitute a Constituent Assembly to draft a constitution for independent India. Then later on in 1938, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru demanded establishment of a Constituent Assembly to enact a constitution for independent India, which is chosen through universal adult franchise. And then finally, under the Cabinet Mission Plan, of 1946, under the Cabinet Mission Plan of 1946, the Constituent Assembly was created. So what is Constituent Assembly? The Constituent Assembly is the special body which was created to draft a constitution for independent India. So this Constituent Assembly was created under the provisions of the Cabinet Mission Plan of 1946. In other words, the creation of Constituent Assembly was done by the British government under the Cabinet Mission Plan of 1946. Then, if you see the composition of the Constituent Assembly is partly elected and partly nominated body. So what do you mean by this? Though Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has argued for choosing the Constituent Assembly through universal adult franchise, through the right to vote for every adult, this was not practically possible in the 1946, 47 and 48. The reasons are, if you want to choose the members of the Constituent Assembly directly through the voters, we need to prepare the voter list throughout the length and breadth of the country. We need to delimit the constituencies. It will all take time. So the transfer of power from the Britishers to India will get delayed. This will create several problems. So though the initial demand made by the Indian National Congress and Nehru was to elect the Constituent Assembly through universal adult franchise, keeping in mind the problems of practical difficulties, it was finally chosen that the Constituent Assembly will be a partly elected body and a partly nominated body. Then what do you mean by partly elected and partly nominated? As I said earlier, in Indian subcontinent we have two parts, British India, the princely states. So British India is that territory of India which is under the direct rule of Britishers. The princely states were under the indirect control of the Britishers. So it was laid down in the Cabinet Mission Plan of 1946. From British India, the members of the Constituent Assembly were chosen by the members of the provincial legislatures. So we have several British Indian provinces. in every British Indian province we have a legislature. So the members of the provincial legislatures will choose the members of the Constituent Assembly, which means the members of the Constituent Assembly from British India, they are chosen indirectly by the members of the provincial legislatures and not directly by the people. That's why it is called partly elected. And why is it called partly nominated? So from the princely states, the members of the Constituent Assembly from the princely states, they are nominated by the rulers of the princely states, not even indirect election. So all the 563 princely states will be represented in the Constituent Assembly, and who should be the representative will be nominated by the ruler of the princely state. So that's why the body is called partly elected, partly nominated. So we should keep in mind the Constituent Assembly is not a fully sovereign body because it is not chosen directly by the people through the universal adult franchise. So that's why there was a criticism against the Constituent Assembly that this body was not a fully sovereign body. This body doesn't enjoy the supreme powers. But remember, the Indian Independence Act of 1947, has declared that the Constituent Assembly for India is made fully sovereign, which means it is made fully powerful to make a constitution of its choice and to repeal any law made by the British Parliament till then. So it is the Indian Independence Act of 1947 which made the Constituent Assembly fully sovereign. But before that, under the Cabinet Mission Plan, when it was created, it was not a fully sovereign body. It is partly elected and a partly nominated body. And then to deal with the work of the constitution making, all the members of the Constituent Assembly, they formed into two kinds of committees, major committees, minor committees. And each committee has took before itself one particular aspect of making of the Indian Constitution. And initially, B.N. Rao, Benegal Narsim Rao, B.N. Rao is the advisor to the Constituent Assembly. He has looked into almost 60 constitutions around the world, and he personally visited some of these countries, and on the basis of his own work, he has made the initial draft. So there were two drafts of the Constitution of India. The first draft was given by B.N. Rao, Benegal Narsim Rao, and a drafting committee headed by B.R. Ambedkar has prepared the second draft on the basis of the first draft. So as I said, the work of the Constituent Assembly was taken up before the committees of the Constituent Assembly. We all know that Babu Rajendra Prasad was the president of the Constituent Assembly. B.N. Rao was the advisor to the Constituent Assembly. And the Constituent Assembly had dual functions. It has two functions, constituent function, lawmaking function. Constituent function means the function of making the Constitution of India. Lawmaking function means the Constituent Assembly also acted as the provisional parliament. And the most important thing in the Constituent Assembly work is objectives resolution. So this objectives resolution was introduced in the Constituent Assembly by Jawaharlal Nehru. The Constituent Assembly has taken up the objectives resolution introduced by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Remember, this objectives resolution in course of time has become the preamble to the Indian Constitution. In other words, the objectives resolution has laid down a roadmap for the Constituent Assembly. So what kind of constitution the Constituent Assembly has to make, that was laid down in the objectives resolution. So the objectives resolution introduced by Jawaharlal Nehru has guided the Constituent Assembly in its work of drafting the Constitution for independent India. And as I said, there are several major committees and minor committees. And the work done by the major committees and minor committees was submitted to the drafting committee. and this drafting committee, on the basis of the report submitted by the committees of the Constituent Assembly, has prepared the draft of the Constitution of India. Remember, B.R. Ambedkar initially did not expect that he will become the chairman of the drafting committee. He was a member of the Constituent Assembly. Later on, he was made a member of the drafting committee, and he was also made the chairman of the drafting committee. Initially, Dr. Ambedkar felt that he will be happy if he is given an opportunity to be the member of the drafting committee so that he can put in place some constitutional legal safeguards for protecting the minorities in the country, for protecting the backward communities in the country. But this man was given a greater opportunity than what he has expected. He was made the chairman of the drafting committee. So finally he was made to lead the entire process of drafting the Constitution of India. And that's the reason why we say Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is the father of the Constitution of India. So here, if you take the role played by drafting committee, the drafting committee has played a very important role in quickly completing the work of drafting the Constitution of India. And then if you see the debates in the Constituent Assembly, they were stretched over 2 years, 11 months and 17 days. And then here, while Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has given a speech to the Constituent Assembly, in that speech, he made it very clear regards the kind of government, the kind of constitution which India needs. And he also said that the Constitution of India is a flexible and a workable and a strong enough to keep the country united both in peacetime and also wartime. So this is the statement which Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has made to the Constituent Assembly. After the draft was ready and after it was put before the Constituent Assembly, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said, the Constitution of India, the draft Constitution of India is a strong enough, flexible and workable to keep the country united both in times of peace and also in times of war. And Dr. B.R. Ambedkar also said, the success of a constitution, it depends on the people and the political parties in this country, which means however good a constitution may be, those who happen to implement this constitution, if they are bad, then the constitution is bound to fail. Even if a constitution is bad, those who work this constitution, if they happen to be good, then that constitution is going to become successful. These are the words of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to the Constituent Assembly. And Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said, the Constitution of India provides for political democracy. He said, the political democracy cannot sustain without social and economic democracy. So he meant political democracy means political equality. So once the Constitution of India comes into force, in India there will be political equality. One man, one vote, one value. But when it comes to economic and social sphere, we are going to witness inequality. So very few in the country were owning the wealth of the country. So that's why there is inequality. So that's why Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has clearly said, if political democracy in India has to sustain, we need to put in place the social and economic democracy. Without social and economic democracy, political democracy cannot continue in this country. So the existing inequalities in the economic and social sphere, if they are not corrected, then the people of this country will blow the political democracy in this country. In addition to this, he explained what he meant by social democracy. He says that social democracy means having liberty, equality and fraternity in the life of the nation. Fraternity. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar says liberty, equality and fraternity, all these three are important. They cannot be separated one from the other. They are all part of a trinity. He says that without equality, liberty will result in supremacy of the few over the many. And without liberty, equality would kill the initiative of individuals. And without liberty and equality, without fraternity, liberty and equality cannot help in promoting national unity. That's why he says all these three are equally important. We need liberty, we need equality, we need fraternity. Today, after 75 years, when it comes to liberty and equality, we have done some reasonable progress. But when it comes to fraternity, the idea of the universal brotherhood, there is a lot which is to be achieved. So that's what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar says. In addition to this, Dr. Ambedkar also says that democracy in India is a top dressing in Indian soil. And Indian society is basically unequal society. It is an undemocratic society. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar says, if people are divided on the lines of caste, on the lines of religion, on the lines of region, we cannot become a nation. Unless people come out of the identity of caste, religion and region, India will never become a nation. And that's what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has warned. And Dr. B.R. Ambedkar also was against hero worship. He felt hero worship in the politics will result in degradation. It will result in destruction of democracy. That's what one more warning from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Then when it comes to the kind of government, what kind of government India should have, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar favored parliamentary democracy over presidential democracy. We all know that United Kingdom is the mother of parliamentary democracy. United States of America is the place of presidential democracy. So the first presidential democracy took both in United States of America. So when we were making a constitution for independent India, we had before us two options: parliamentary democracy, presidential democracy. See, presidential democracy stood for stability. Parliamentary democracy stood for accountability and responsibility. But we cannot have both. You cannot have both accountability and stability in one kind of government. So that's why Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he chose parliamentary democracy in place of presidential democracy. The reason is, B.R. Ambedkar argued that accountability and responsibility is much more important than stability. And again, in parliamentary democracy, the executive power is given to a group of individuals called the Council of Ministers, which means in a parliamentary democracy, the sharing of political power is possible. So India has got parliamentary democracy at the union and at the state level. The executive power is conferred on the Council of Ministers. In this Council of Ministers, we can accommodate the diversity of India. We can have a minister from majority community, minority community, upper caste, lower caste, and also men, women, and transgender. So, as a parliamentary democracy permits sharing of political power among diverse social groups, this will meet the aspirations of different social groups, thereby it keeps the country united. And in addition to this, in a presidential democracy like in USA, the president is the head of the government and also the head of the state, American nation state. But in India, which is a parliamentary democracy, we do have Indian president. Indian president does not resemble the American president because Indian president is the head of the Indian nation state. Indian president is not the head of the government. But in America, the American president is the head of the government and also the head of the American nation state. In India, the Indian president is the head of the Indian nation state, but Indian prime minister is the head of the government. President represents the nation, but he doesn't rule the nation. So that's one big difference between Indian parliamentary democracy and American presidential democracy. And Dr. B.R. Ambedkar also says that in America, The entire executive power is conferred on a single individual, that is the American president. To advise the American president, he has a team of advisors. But the advice given by the advisors is not binding on the American president. The American president can say no to any advice given by the advisors to him. And he can remove any advisor at any point of time. But in India, the Indian president cannot do anything without the advice of the Council of Ministers. Because as I said, the executive power in India is conferred on the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister, but not on the President. The President is nominal executive. But in America, the President is the real executive. So the President cannot do anything without the advice of the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. This is again the second big difference. In addition to this, in United States of America, the American President and the advisors to the American President, they are not members of the American Parliament. But in India, if you want to become a minister, you must be a member of the Parliament. In other words, in American system, there is separation of executive and legislature. But in Indian system, there is a fusion of executive and legislature. If you want to become a member of the executive, if you want to become a minister, you should be a member of the Parliament. In addition to that, India is an example for parliamentary executive, but America is an example for non-parliamentary executive. In India, if a political party or a group of political parties, if they want to form the executive branch, they should have majority in the lower house. But this is not required in American system. And again, under the American system, the accountability of the executive is only periodical, once in a while. For example, in United States of America, the elections to the House of Representatives were conducted once in 2 years. So the American president is accountable to the people once in 2 years. But in India, under parliamentary democracy, the executive is accountable on daily basis. It is also accountable periodically. We all know that in India, elections are conducted once in 5 years, and every time when there is an election, the executive is made accountable for its omissions and commissions. In addition to that, in a parliamentary democracy, the executive branch is made continuously accountable to the legislature, because in India, the executive branch is part and parcel of the legislature. Every time when there is a meeting of the parliament, in India the parliament meets 3 times in a year. Budget session, monsoon session, winter session. Every time when the parliament meets in the sessions of the parliament, the members of the parliament can ask questions to the executive, which means this is daily accountability and responsibility. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar favored parliamentary democracy because of these advantages of parliamentary democracy over presidential democracy. This he has explained to the Constituent Assembly in his address to the Constituent Assembly. Then when it comes to the kind of constitution, form of constitution, so while delivering a lecture and a speech before the Constituent Assembly, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has favored a federal constitution for India over a unitary constitution. We all know that what is a federal constitution, what is a unitary constitution. If a constitution confers all the powers, executive, legislative, financial and judicial powers in one government, that is called unitary constitution. Example, France, United Kingdom, Sri Lanka, etc. But a federal constitution is one which divides the executive and legislative powers between the central and the state governments. So India is a country with a lot of diversity, huge population and huge geographical size. In any country where the population is huge, where the diversity is very high, where the land size is very huge, in all such countries a federal constitution is much better suited. The reason is, in a federal constitution, there is a central government at the center and there are state governments at the periphery. So on all those items which are of national importance, the central government will have the power. On all the items which are of regional importance, the state governments are powerful. In other words, the federal constitution will provide for dividing the political powers between the center and the states, which means if the federal constitution provides for sharing of powers between the center and the states, it will meet the sub-national aspirations, and once if the sub-national aspirations are met, then keeping the country united is much more easy. So this is the wisdom on the part of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar for choosing a federal constitution over unitary constitution. If India has chosen unitary constitution with all powers concentrated in Delhi, by now India would have been broken down into several Indias. So with a lot of wisdom and keeping in mind the requirements of India, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has argued for a federal constitution for India over unitary constitution. In addition to this, in all the classical federations which existed till then, there are two problems with the federal constitutions. One is rigidity, the second one is legalism. So all the federal constitutions, including the United States of America and the Swiss federal constitution, they are in a tight mold of federalism, which means they are not flexible. But Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said that the Indian constitution is made flexible, which means in normal times it will run as a federation, but in emergency situations it can become unitary. So without any formal amendment to the Indian constitution, the Constitution of India can be either federal or unitary depending on the circumstance. You don't find this flexibility in other classical federations of that period. So this was deliberately inserted in the Constitution of India to suit to the requirements of India. If there is national emergency, the constitution becomes unitary, and the crisis situation can be handled much better. If it is normal times, then there will be both central and state governments doing their respective job. So this is one explanation which Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has given to the Constituent Assembly. The other one is, unlike other classical federations, the Indian Constitution has provided for a strong central government. So during national emergency, the Union government and the Indian Parliament can control the state governments. When national emergency is in operation, Parliament can make laws with respect to all the items in the state list. It's not only that, even in normal times, Indian Parliament can make laws on the subjects in the state list for protecting the national interests, for implementing an international agreement. So this is the flexibility which was built into Indian Constitution to make it more workable. In addition to this, in the classical federations, the judiciary will be dual. The judiciary of the center will be separate from the judiciary of the states. In a federal constitution, there is bound to be diversity. This diversity sometimes may create anarchy, confusion, instability. That's the reason why Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he provided for an integrated judiciary, one set of courts both for center and states. In India, the judiciary is common for the center and the states. This is again a deviation from classical federations. This idea is again to promote unity and integrity of India. The other one is single citizenship. Usually countries with the federal constitutions, they will have dual citizenship. But by having a single citizenship, by promoting the feeling of universal brotherhood, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar thought of promoting the national unity in this country. In addition to this, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has also provided for all India services. So in all the federal constitutions, we have central services and state services, federal services and state services. In India, we have federal services, that is central services, and also state services. In addition to that, he provided for all India services. All India services are those services which are common to the center and the states. They play an important role in protecting the unity and integrity of India, and they also play an important role in maintaining the standards of administration. So this is the care which is taken by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in promoting the national unity and protecting the unity and integrity of India. In addition to this, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar also says that by having a concurrent list with around 52 items, now they are there in the concurrent list, the required national unity and uniformity can be achieved by the Indian Parliament by enacting on the subjects in the concurrent list. Unless there is a strong central government, keeping the country united is very difficult. That's why he provided for a union list with many items. In the beginning, we had 97 items, today we have 98 items. So unlike the other classical federations, B.R. Ambedkar allowed for a stronger and a wider jurisdiction for the center by creating a union list with 97 items. So these are all the measures which were taken by the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in providing a strong and flexible, workable constitution for India. This is what he has explained in the Constituent Assembly. Then, when it comes to the implementation of the constitution. Remember, I said B.N. Rao prepared the initial draft. On the basis of the draft prepared by B.N. Rao, the committees of the Constituent Assembly worked on several items of the Constitution of India. And after all the reports were submitted by the committees of the Constituent Assembly to the drafting committee, the drafting committee again has taken a lot of time and has finalized the second draft of the Indian Constitution. So this draft of the Indian Constitution was taken up for detailed discussion in the Constituent Assembly. Several amendments were proposed with a lot of debate and a deep insight into the provisions of the Constitution. The Constitution was finally adopted and enacted on 26th November 1949. This is what we say Constitution Day. The Constitution Day is the day on which the Constitution was adopted and enacted. As I said, on 26th November 1947, the Constitution of India was adopted and enacted. That's why November 26th is being celebrated as the Constitution Day. But the Constitution, which was ready by 26th November 1949, it has come into operation on 26th January 1950. On 26th January 1950. That's why we celebrate 26th January as the Republic Day. Then when it comes to the Constituent Assembly, there was a criticism. What is the criticism of the Constituent Assembly? One is, it has taken a very long time for drafting the Constitution for independent India. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has rejected this argument, saying that the countries, when constitutions are made for countries like Canada, USA, Australia, South Africa, these constitutions were very small compared to the Constitution of India, which is bigger. So if you compare the time taken by these countries with the time taken by India, India has done its job of completing the work of making of Indian Constitution in a very reasonable time frame. So this criticism, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar did not agree. Then the second criticism against the Constituent Assembly is, it is dominated by Congress. And this is obvious. The Indian National Congress is the party which got independence for India. And Indian National Congress was popular throughout the country, length and breadth of the country. And obviously, the Congress will dominate the Constituent Assembly. But don't forget that the Constituent Assembly is not a homogeneous body. Within Congress, we have different shades of opinion. So that's the advantage of having diversity of opinion within the Indian National Congress Party. The next one, it was again criticized that there were too many lawyers in the Constituent Assembly that led to the language being more complex and beyond the understanding of the common man. This criticism is true to some extent. So the language which was used in the Constituent Assembly, despite efforts to keep it simple, has become much more complex, and it is really beyond the understanding of the common man. So this is the criticism which is leveled against the Constituent Assembly. One more criticism is, it was criticized that the Constituent Assembly is not a fully sovereign body. Maybe in the beginning this is true, but as I said, the Indian Independence Act of 1947 has really made it a fully sovereign body. So from the enactment of the Indian Independence Act 1947, the Constituent Assembly became fully sovereign. So this criticism also not valid. So that's it about the making of the Constitution. We are done with the making of the Constitution. Then the next one, salient features of the Indian Constitution. See, when the Constitution was made by the Constituent Assembly, as I said, B.N. Rao has studied almost 60 constitutions of the world, and that formed the basis for the Constitution of India, which came into force on 26th January 1950. Remember, most of the administrative details in the existing Constitution of India, they are borrowed from Government of India Act 1935. So more than 40% of the provisions of the Constitution of 1950, they are borrowed from Government of India Act 1935. Remember, usually in the constitutions, the administrative details are not usually spelled out. They are left to the legislature to be decided. But Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was very cautious about leaving it to the legislature. If this power is not properly exercised by the legislature in working out the details of administration, that will undermine the working of the Indian Constitution. So as a matter of abundant caution, even the administrative details were made part of the Indian Constitution and they were carefully borrowed from Government of India Act 1935. So that's why Government of India Act 1935 has huge impact on the Constitution of India of 1950. That's why the Constitution of India of 1950 was also called the carbon copy of Government of India Act 1935. In addition to Government of India Act 1935, which had an impact on the Constitution of 1950, there are several constitutions across the world which had impacted the making of the Indian Constitution. But remember, no provision of the Indian Constitution is blindly copied from the constitutions of the other countries. Every provision which was inserted in the Indian Constitution was carefully studied, debated, and it was suitably modified before it is inserted in the Indian Constitution to suit to the requirements of India. If somebody says that Indian Constitution is a Xerox copy of other constitutions in the world, we don't need to agree with that criticism. Of course, we looked into all the constitutions around the world, but we have studied every provision, carefully amended it, modified it to suit to the requirements of India. Then what are the constitutions in the world which have shown huge impact on the Indian Constitution? If you take, as I said, Government of India Act. So the Government of India Act 1935 was the basis for borrowing administrative provisions into the Constitution of India, especially the federal scheme, the division of powers between the center and the states, the office of governor, judiciary, public service commissions, emergency provisions, and all the administrative details are borrowed from Government of India Act 1935. Then when it comes to the British Constitution, so the parliamentary democracy, rule of law, equality before law, the legislative procedure, the idea of single citizenship, the idea of bicameral parliament, they are all borrowed from the Constitution of United Kingdom. So parliamentary government, rule of law, legislative procedure, single citizenship, cabinet system of government, parliamentary privileges, bicameral parliament, prerogative rights. So these are the features which we borrowed into Indian Constitution from the Constitution of United Kingdom. Then from the American Constitution, we have borrowed the idea of a federation, we have borrowed the idea of judicial review, we have borrowed the concept of Supreme Court, an independent Supreme Court, and then the concept of fundamental rights. See, fundamental rights, independence of judiciary, judicial review, impeachment of the president, the way the president of India is removed, the procedure for the removal of the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court, and the office of the vice president. These are the features which we have borrowed from the American Constitution. Then when it comes to Irish Constitution, directive principles of state policy. I said in the beginning, political democracy, social and economic democracy. See, political democracy is achieved through fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution. Social and economic democracy is achieved through implementation of directive principles of state policy. But the idea of directive principles of state policy is borrowed from Irish Constitution. In addition to this, in Rajya Sabha you have nominated members. So the idea of having nominated members in Rajya Sabha was borrowed from Irish Constitution. And again, the method of election of the president. In India, the president is elected by an electoral college consisting of elected members of parliament and also the elected members of legislative assemblies. This idea is borrowed from Irish Constitution. Then when you take the Canadian Constitution, if you take the original federal constitution of USA, the central government is weak, but a federation with a strong center, this idea is borrowed from Canadian Constitution. And then residuary powers. So in the Constitution of India, in Article 246, in the 7th schedule, the powers are divided into three categories: union list, state list, concurrent list. And whatever is not mentioned in any of these three lists, it is called the residuary power. Under the American Constitution, residuary powers are given to states, but under the Indian Constitution, residuary powers are given to the center, that is the parliament. This makes the central government strong, and this idea is borrowed from Canadian Constitution. In addition to that, appointment of the governors by the center. So we know that in India the governors are appointed by the union government. This is taken from Canadian Constitution. We also know that the Indian Supreme Court has got advisory jurisdiction under Article 143, which means the Supreme Court can give advice on the matters referred to it by the President. So this advisory jurisdiction of the Indian Supreme Court is again borrowed from Canadian Constitution. Then Australian Constitution, I said we have the concurrent list under the Indian Constitution containing 52 items now. So the idea of concurrent list is borrowed from Australian Constitution. In addition to this, freedom of trade and commerce, which was laid down in the Constitution, this is again borrowed from Australian Constitution. And the next most important one, joint sitting. So when an ordinary bill, with respect to an ordinary bill, when there is a deadlock between the upper house and lower house, there is a provision for joint sitting. The members of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, they sit together and decide. So this idea of joint sitting is borrowed from, again, Australian Constitution. Then when it comes to the Weimar Constitution of Germany, when national emergency is in operation, fundamental rights can be suspended. So the suspension of fundamental rights when national emergency is in operation, this idea is borrowed from German Constitution. Then when it comes to Soviet Union, the Constitution of Soviet Union, now today it is called Russia, from it was taken two ideas. One is fundamental duties, 51A, Part 4A. So the idea of fundamental duties and the political, economic and social justice which is laid down in the preamble and in the directive principles of state policy, this is borrowed from the Constitution of Soviet Union. The idea of fundamental duties, political, economic and social justice, borrowed from Constitution of Soviet Union. Then when it comes to French Constitution, the idea of republic, republican constitution, then the liberty, equality and fraternity. These are the slogans of the French Revolution. So the slogans of liberty, equality and fraternity which are there in the preamble, they are borrowed from French Constitution. In addition to this, from the South African Constitution we have borrowed the procedure for amendment of the Constitution. So the Indian Constitution is amended by three ways. This procedure is borrowed from South African Constitution. And in India, the members of the Rajya Sabha, which is the upper house, are indirectly elected. This method of election is again borrowed from South African Constitution. Then when it comes to Japanese Constitution, though the Constitution of today is based on due process of law, but the Constitution of 1950 was initially based on procedure established by law. So the idea of procedure established by law is borrowed from Japanese Constitution. So these are some of the major constitutions in the world which have an impact on the making of the Indian Constitution. So hi friends, let's continue the next topic, salient features of the Indian Constitution. And remember, this is again very important for both your prelims and mains exam. Many questions have come in the prelims as well as in the mains exam on the salient features of the Indian Constitution. So let's take up one by one and let me explain you in detail the ideas behind the concepts of salient feature. If you see the salient features which were laid down, the lengthiest written constitution, it was derived from various sources, combination of rigidity and flexibility, federal system with a unitary bias, parliamentary form of government, synthesis of parliamentary sovereignty and judicial supremacy, integrated and independent judiciary, fundamental rights, directive principles of state policy, fundamental duties, a secular state, universal adult franchise, single citizenship, independent constitutional authorities, emergency provisions, three-tier government. If you take the first one, lengthiest written constitution, remember, among the constitutions in the world, Indian Constitution is the lengthiest written constitution in the world. And why did the constitution become very lengthy? There are many reasons. If you take a country like United States of America, the Constitution of USA is the smallest constitution in the world. The reason is, in America, the constitution for the federal government is different from the constitution of each state. In America, the constitution for the center is separate and each state has got its own constitution. But in India, there is one constitution both for center and the state governments. And that is the reason why it has become a lengthy document. The second reason is, as a matter of abundant caution, to make sure that the constitution gets worked out more effectively, several administrative details which otherwise don't find a mention in the constitution, they were also made part of the Indian Constitution by members of the Constituent Assembly. This is the second reason why the constitution became a lengthy document. And we know that in India we have a number of minority communities, religious minorities we have, a number of communities which are social and educationally backward. We have tribals, we have Dalits, we have other backward classes, we have women, children. For all these social groups, we have incorporated certain safeguards in the Constitution of India. In addition to this, in India, we have certain regions which are inhabited by the tribals who are the most backward in the country. They are also provided with certain constitutional safeguards. So the constitutional safeguards which are provided to the religious minorities, the tribal communities, and other backward classes which are social and educational backward also made the Constitution of India a lengthy document. In India, there are a number of states which are given special status, and they were given special provisions, and this is one more reason why the Constitution of India became a lengthy document. So yes, it is true that the Constitution of India is one of the bulkiest constitutions in the world, or it is the bulkiest and the lengthiest constitution in the world. And there are reasons, there are very, very valid reasons why the Constitution of India was made a lengthy document. And we don't need to worry much about the length of the Indian Constitution. This was done to make the Constitution more workable so that it can endure for long. It can withstand the test of time. Then when it comes to the second one, this is a constitution which is heavily borrowed. This is the criticism. There is nothing wrong in borrowing from other constitutions of the world. When the Constitution of India was made in 1947-48, we have before us the experience of countries like the France, like the Soviet Union, like the Constitution of USA. So by looking into these constitutions, we tried to borrow what suits to the Indian requirements, and we wanted to avoid the fault lines in the then existing constitutions. So the idea of having a government in place which suits to the requirements of India and having a constitution in place which suits to the requirements of India, instead it needs a detailed look into the constitutions which are working by then. So it is true that the Constitution of India is borrowed from several constitutions which existed then. But remember, it is not a blind imitation of the existing constitutions. When the other constitutions in the world are studied, every care is taken to see that whether these provisions will suit to the requirements of India. Wherever they don't suit to the requirements of India, they are either given up, or wherever it is necessary, they are suitably modified before they are inserted in the Indian Constitution. Then, if you take the third one, it is a mix of rigidity and flexibility. This I told you. All the classical federations which existed till then, like the Australian Constitution, American Constitution, Swiss Constitution, one very disadvantage with these constitutions is they are very rigid, which means they cannot adapt to the changing circumstances of time. Amending them becomes very difficult. But very fortunately, because of the wisdom of the members of the Constituent Assembly, Indian Constitution, though federal, is not made very rigid. For example, if you want to amend the American Constitution, the amendment has to be done by the American Parliament by special majority, and a 3/4 state shall agree. This is very difficult. That's the reason why in the last 220 years, the American Constitution is amended hardly 28 times. But in India, most of the provisions can be amended by the Indian Parliament by simple majority. And some of the provisions like the fundamental rights and directive principles can be amended by the Parliament alone, but by special majority. A majority of the total membership and also 2/3 of the members present and voting. When it comes to amending the federal provisions, along with Parliament by special majority, half of the state legislatures have to agree by simple majority. So compared to classical federations, amending the Indian Constitution is not very rigid. It's relatively more flexible, and that makes the Constitution more adaptable. So why we say that it is a mix of rigidity and flexibility? Those features which are not federal in nature, there they can be amended very easily by Parliament alone by simple majority. That speaks about the flexible nature. And where the federal provisions are involved, amending the federal provisions requires approval of the Parliament by special majority, and also approval by half of the states by simple majority. This is the rigid part of the Indian Constitution. That's why Indian Constitution, it's a synthesis of rigidity and flexibility. And Granville Austin has appreciated and prized the amending procedure of the Indian Constitution. It was one of the ably conceived provisions of the Indian Constitution. That's what Granville Austin told about the procedure for amending the Indian Constitution. Then the next one is federal system with unitary bias. So Indian Constitution, though federal, has provided for a strong center. We know that India is a country with a lot of diversity, with a huge size of the land, and also with a lot of population. To manage this diversity and to keep the country united, it is necessary to have a strong center. And rightly, the framers of the Indian Constitution have provided for a strong center. How do we say that the center is very strong? Because in the union list we have 97 items, but in the state list we have only 59 items. So center is strong. With respect to items on the concurrent list, the center is having supremacy over the states. In addition to that, when national emergency is in operation, the constitution becomes unitary, the center is all powerful. The revenue raising capacity of the central government is far superior compared to the state governments. The union government controls financial resources. The union government can make laws on the subjects in the state list not only during national emergency but even in normal times. And this makes the central government strong, and we need a strong central government to keep the country united. Then the next one, parliamentary form of government. This I have already explained. The Constitution of India provides for parliamentary democracy but not for presidential democracy, because it is the parliamentary democracy which suits to India much better than the presidential democracy. And what are the advantages of parliamentary democracy over presidential democracy? Parliamentary democracy is much more accountable and responsible. It allows for sharing of political power. It allows for accommodating diversity of India. It makes the government more accountable and responsible to the legislature on daily basis as well as on periodical basis. So because of these advantages, we chose parliamentary democracy in place of presidential democracy. Then when it comes to the next salient feature, we all know that in United Kingdom, the parliament is very powerful, legislature is powerful. In America, judiciary is powerful. In France, executive is powerful. But when we made a constitution for independent India, we tried to borrow parliamentary sovereignty from United Kingdom, judicial supremacy from the United States of America. This was called the synthesis, a synthesis of parliamentary sovereignty and judicial supremacy. But we ended up with judicial supremacy. In India, among the executive, legislature and judicial branches, it is the judiciary which is more powerful. And this is true in every country. Wherever there is a written constitution, it obviously will result in supremacy of the judiciary over the remaining two branches, executive and legislature. But initially we provided for parliamentary sovereignty and judicial supremacy, a synthesis of both we tried. But then the next important feature is independent judiciary. Here we have two things, integrated judiciary, independent judiciary. So the Constitution of India provides for an independent judiciary. What do you mean by judicial independence? It is necessary to protect the Constitution of India. So the Supreme Court of India is the final protector and interpreter of the Indian Constitution. If the Supreme Court has to protect the Indian Constitution, it has to be independent. How independence is guaranteed? If you want to remove the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court, it can be done only by Parliament by special majority, through a tough majority. This makes the judiciary independent. And integrated is different. Integrated judiciary means having a common set of courts both for center and states. In United States of America, the judiciary of the center is independent of the judiciary of each state. But in India, that is not the case. As I said earlier, in the Constituent Assembly, when Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has given a speech to promote unity in this country, to avoid anarchy, confusion in this country, instead of having two sets of courts, one for the center and the states, it was deliberately designed to have one set of courts both for center and states. This will promote national integration and unity. That's the meaning of integrated judiciary. So in America we have dual judiciary, but in India we have integrated judiciary. One set of courts both for center and states. They are like a pyramid, one above the other. And this is necessary in a country like India, which is diverse in terms of population, geography and also size. The next one, fundamental rights. See, the concept of written fundamental rights is again an important feature of the Indian Constitution. So, the fundamental rights which are laid down in the Indian Constitution in Part 3, they cannot be taken away by the executive and legislative branches through ordinary process of law making. So, through ordinary laws, fundamental rights cannot be violated. It requires a constitutional amendment to amend the fundamental rights, and without fundamental rights, then there is no meaning for liberty and the freedoms which are laid down in the preamble. The preamble speaks about liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship. This liberty will not have any meaning if the fundamental rights are not protected from the invasion by the state. That's an important feature. And it is again, fundamental rights are important because fundamental rights are responsible for achieving the ideal of political democracy. The ideal of political democracy in India is achieved through fundamental rights. Then the next one is directive principles of state policy. Directive principles of state policy is again an important feature. We know that in India, since times immemorial, there are inequalities in the economic and social sphere. That's the reason why the framers of the Indian Constitution wants to bring in equality in the economic and social sphere. They want to build an egalitarian society, an equal society. And this can be achieved by implementing the directive principles of state policy. So, directive principles of state policy, they lay a foundation for economic and social democracy. Without economic and social democracy, political democracy in India cannot survive for long. That's what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said in the Constituent Assembly. The next one, fundamental duties. So, fundamental duties were not initially part of the original Indian Constitution. They were incorporated in course of time in 1976 through the 42nd Amendment. So, this is to create a sense of responsibility on the citizens of India. They do have rights, but on the other hand, they also have the duties to be performed. So, that's the importance of fundamental duties. Then, a secular nation state. So, this is again a very, very important feature. So, members of the Constituent Assembly like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, like Jawaharlal Nehru, they all felt that if minorities in this country are not given equal rights, then we are going to create a sense of insecurity in their mind. So, they will destabilize India, they will pose threat to the security of India. So, keeping this in mind, keeping the diversity of India, people like Nehru, Gandhi and Ambedkar, they argued for equal rights for all the religious communities. That's the idea of secular nation state. So, the idea of secular nation state says that there are full rights and equal rights for all the religious communities, irrespective of whether they are majority or minority community. So, the advantage of this is it will create a sense of security in the minds of minorities. Then they will remain loyal to the Indian nation state. Then that will protect the unity and integrity of India. So, the secular nature of the Indian Constitution is again a very, very important feature which is incorporated in the Indian Constitution. That was the reason why India has survived for a long of 75 years. If India were not to be a secular nation state, if India were to be a theocratic state, by now India would have been broken down into several pieces. So, this again speaks about the wisdom of the members of the Constituent Assembly. The next one, universal adult franchise. This is again a very remarkable feature of the Indian Constitution, a revolutionary feature of the Indian Constitution. Remember, the Constitution of UPSC was made in 1787, but the women got the right to vote in 1900, 1910, 1920. The democracy in UK is 800 years old, but from day one women did not have the right to vote. They got the right to vote in 1910, 1920. So, it took hundreds of years for the women to get the right to vote on par with men. Unlike USA, unlike UK, the Constitution of India of 1950 has given the right to vote for all the adults, irrespective of gender, irrespective of religion, irrespective of region, irrespective of ethnicity. So, this is remarkable and revolutionary in many ways, because no other constitution till then has given the right to vote for all the people at one go. So, it speaks about the remarkable faith which the framers of the Indian Constitution has put on the ordinary men and women. And the ordinary men and women have lived up to the expectations of the framers of the Constituent Assembly. Every successive government which has not performed well, they were thrown out of power. Those governments which have done well, they are repeatedly brought back to power by the people. So, the faith on the common man stands vindicated. It is proven right after the experience of last 75 years. So, universal adult franchise means giving the right to vote for every adult citizen, irrespective of gender, irrespective of religion, irrespective of ethnicity. Then the single citizenship. Though Indian Constitution is federal, we didn't go for dual citizenship. We went in for single citizenship. Here again, the framers of the Indian Constitution felt that by providing for single citizenship, we can promote the concept of universal brotherhood among all the people of this country. And this will promote national unity. This will promote national integration, which is necessary. So that's the reason behind having single citizenship in the Indian Constitution despite being federal. The next one, independent constitutional authorities. This is again a novel feature of the Indian Constitution. Today in India, we have free and fair elections for the last 75 years. This is because of Election Commission of India, which is an important constitutional authority. We have the Supreme Court and High Courts, which are autonomous and independent, protecting the Indian Constitution. We have Comptroller and Auditor General, checking the financial irregularities of the union and the state governments. In addition to that, we have the GST Council in the recent past, managing the center-state financial relations. So the idea of independent constitutional authorities is again a novel feature of the Indian Constitution. So these independent constitutional authorities have promoted and sustained the democracy in India. The next one, emergency provisions. Emergency provisions. We have three kinds of emergency under the Indian Constitution: national emergency, state emergency, financial emergency. Again, these provisions are very novel features because especially when national emergency is declared in India, the Constitution becomes unitary. And this is necessary to keep the country united when there was threat to the idea of India. So that's again, the emergency provisions in the Indian Constitution were very carefully designed to meet unexpected situations in the country. Then three-tier government. So in the beginning, the Constitution of India is a two-tiered federalism, which means we have union government and the state governments, both deriving their powers from the Constitution. Today we have the third tier of government, the local government. In India today we have three-tiered federalism. So we have the union government, we have the state governments, and we also have the local governments. All the three levels of the government, they derive their authority from the Constitution. That's the meaning of three-tier government. In addition to what is laid down in this table, there are other features of the Indian Constitution which are salient features. For example, Indian Constitution is an example for cooperative federalism. What do you mean by cooperative federalism? In India, the center and the states, they cooperate with each other. And there is mutual interdependence between the national and regional governments. The central government is dependent on states, states are dependent on the central government. This is what is called mutual interdependence. So India is a very good example for cooperative federalism. It's not only that. We are not only cooperative federalism, we are also a competitive federalism. The states will compete with each other, the states compete with center, local governments compete with each other. So this is which is called the competitive federalism. Then again we are also a combative federalism. The center and the states, they fight with each other on several issues. So India is a combination of cooperative federalism, competitive federalism and combative federalism. In addition to this, there is one more idea, asymmetrical federalism. So in India, in the Constitution of India, there are special provisions, special safeguards for tribals, Dalits, minorities, women, children. And there are certain special provisions for some of the states, for some of the regions. That's why we say India is an example for asymmetrical federalism. And asymmetrical federalism is necessary to address the problems of minorities, to address the problems of backward groups, to address the problems of backward regions. And that's why the Constitution of India became a asymmetrical federalism. But unlike USA, United States of America is an example for symmetrical federalism. Then India is also a socialist nation state, which means achieving an equal society is one of the goals of the Indian Constitution, which is laid down in the preamble. So India is a secular, socialist, democratic republic. That's about the salient features of the Indian Constitution. So let's get into the next topic, preamble. Preamble of the Indian Constitution. Within this preamble, we will try to focus on the text of the preamble, ingredients of the preamble, keywords in the preamble, significance of the preamble. Is preamble a part of the Constitution? Can the preamble be amended? So if you take the text of the Constitution starts with preamble. What is preamble? So preamble, if you take Nani Palkiwala, see Nani Palkiwala defined preamble as the identity card of the Indian Constitution, as the identity card of the Indian Constitution. If you take a Constitution of USA, American Constitution is the first constitution to start with a preamble. Preamble is nothing but an introduction to the Constitution, or it's a preface to the Constitution. So American Constitution is the first constitution in the world to start with a preamble. The Constitution of India also starts with a preamble. And let us see the text of the preamble. See, the preamble reads as follows. We the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. So sovereign, secular and socialist, they are missing from this text, but I am adding them. We the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice. What kind of justice? Social, economic and political. Liberty. What kind of liberty? Liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship. Equality, equality of status and opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact and give to ourselves this Constitution. See, if you read the preamble, after reading the text of the preamble, we can draw the following conclusions. The first one, if you see here, we the people of India, we the people of India, it means the source of the Indian Constitution is the people of India. So the Constitution is made by the people, it was given to the people of this country. So the Constitution draws its source from the people of the country. That's one important conclusion. The second one, the preamble also speaks about the day on which the Constitution was adopted and enacted. If you see at the end of the preamble, it was said here, 26th day of November 1949. The preamble says, the Constitution is adopted and enacted on 26th November 1949. This is the second important conclusion. The third one, preamble also speaks about the nature of the Indian state. The nature of the Indian state, which means what kind of government does the Constitution of India provide for? A sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. This is the nature of the Indian state. What kind of state India is? It is a sovereign nation, secular nation, socialist nation, democratic nation, republican nation. The nature of the state. The next one is, what are the objectives of the Constitution of India? So the preamble speaks about the goals to be achieved by the Indian Constitution. The goals are justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. So these are the goals which are laid down in the Constitution, in the preamble. So the preamble speaks about four things. People are the source of authority. The Constitution is adopted and enacted on 26th November 1949. It speaks about the nature of the Indian state. It speaks about the goals of the Indian Constitution. Then let's take up one by one. One by one. If you take up the source of authority, we the people. So the words in the preamble, that is the we the people, they speak about the sovereignty. Sovereignty. What do you mean by sovereignty? Supreme political power. So in India, the supreme political power is with the people of this country. So the people by exercising their right to vote, they transfer this sovereign power to the elected representatives. That's the reason why India is an example for indirect democracy or a representative democracy. The people, by exercising the right to vote, will transfer their supreme political power to the elected representatives. So the elected representatives in turn will govern the people of this country. This is called indirect or representative democracy and the principle of sovereignty. So we the people of India in the preamble speaks about people as the source of authority for the Indian Constitution. Then the other things, socialist. See, the term socialist is inserted in the Indian preamble in 1976 through the 42nd Amendment. So the preamble which was there in a 1950 Constitution did not contain the word socialist. But today the preamble does contain the word socialist. Not only socialist, the word secular was also added to the Indian preamble in 1976 through the 42nd Amendment. So the terms socialist and secular, they were added in 1976 through the 42nd Amendment. Then what does the word socialist mean? The term socialist means building an egalitarian society, an equal society, building a welfare state. In addition to that, the word socialist also means domination of the public sector in the Indian economy. So nationalization of the major resources in the country. All this comes under the definition of socialism. So socialism speaks about achieving an equal society or an egalitarian society. This is done through nationalization of major industries and public sector occupying the commanding heights. It also means establishing a welfare state, establishing an equal society. That's the meaning of the word socialist. And then the next keyword in the preamble is secular. This I have already explained. What do you mean by the word secular? The word secular means giving full and equal rights to all the people of this country, to all the citizens of this country. So irrespective of religion, irrespective of gender, irrespective of ethnicity, if all the people are given equal rights and full rights, then that is called secularism. So there will be no discrimination on the ground of religion. In a state in a secular nation state, there will be no discrimination on the ground of religion. People of different religious communities and different faiths, irrespective of their numbers, they are treated equally on par with the majority community. That is the idea of secularism. I told you why we provided for a secular nation state. So if all the people of different religious faiths are given equal rights and full rights, they don't fear discrimination in the hands of the majority community. They will have a sense of security in their mind. They would remain loyal to the Indian nation state. This will protect the unity and integrity of India. That's the reason why the framers of the Indian Constitution provided for a secular nation state. Remember, though the term secular was added in 1946 through the 42nd Amendment, it was already implicit in the Constitution of India. Articles from 25 to 28, they speak about a secular nation state. So the idea of equal rights to the people of different religious faiths is laid down in the Constitution of India in Part 3 in fundamental rights from Articles 25 to 28. So the idea of secularism, which is implicit in the Constitution of India, was made explicit in 1976 through the 42nd Amendment. Then if you see the Constituent Assembly debates, in the Constituent Assembly, Hasrat Mohani, Brajeshwar Prasad, they wanted the words socialist and secular to be inserted in the preamble. And Brajeshwar Prasad said if the word secular was used in the preamble, it will tone up the morality of the minority communities. And Brajeshwar Prasad also said the future of India lies in socialism. So these two words, they need to be inserted in the preamble. That's what he said. But Dr. B.R. Ambedkar rejected all these arguments. He said that yes, India is no doubt a secular nation state. It was very elaborately laid down in the Constitution of India. And some feel that the idea of secularism is opposite to the religion. So to avoid creating confusion in the minds of the people, the word secular was avoided by inserting in the preamble. Then when it comes to socialist, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said, what should be the policy of the government of the day must be left to the best wisdom of the government of the day, because maybe today from 1950 to 1990 we followed the model of secularism that failed in India. So from 1990 onwards we are following the model of capitalism. So what should be the policy of the government it is best to be left decided by the government of the day. So if we try to impose any economic policy on the government, then it means destroying the democracy altogether. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar wanted the flexibility to be given to the government of the day in deciding the economic policy of the circumstances of the time. So that's the reason why he also rejected using the word socialist in the preamble. But he is not definitely against socialism. He is not definitely against secularism. Then the next keywords, socialist, secular, democratic. India is no doubt a democracy, that's what I showed. So democracy, it is a form of government where the people rule them either directly or indirectly. In India, people rule them indirectly through elected representatives. That's why India is an indirect and representative democracy. And even within that, we are a parliamentary democracy, not presidential democracy. And I told you in this video earlier why we chose a parliamentary democracy and why not a presidential democracy. So India is a democracy. India is not a monarchy. India is not a theocratic state. The next one, so sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, republic. What do you mean by republic? So in any country, if the head of the nation state is chosen by the people, either directly or indirectly, then that is a republic. American nation state is republic, French nation state is republic. On the same lines, Indian nation state is also a republic. Sovereignty, when I have discussed about sovereignty, it refers to supreme political power of the people. And it has got two dimensions, external sovereignty, internal sovereignty. External sovereignty means India is externally independent of any other foreign nation or organization. So it can decide for itself the foreign policy of this country. And similarly, internal sovereignty means internally it is supreme to take any action with respect to the issues within the boundary of the country. So there are two dimensions for the concept of sovereignty, external sovereignty and internal sovereignty. Sovereignty in simple terms, it refers to supreme political power. So that's about the nature of the state which is laid down in the preamble. The next one is goals of the constitution. The first one, I said justice, political, economic and social justice. So political justice means political equality. It is sought to be achieved through implementing the fundamental rights. So fundamental rights are laid down in the Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. By implementing and enforcing the fundamental rights, we are going to achieve the goal of political justice, political equality. Similarly, economic and social justice can be achieved by implementing the directive principles of state policy. The next one, the next goal, one is justice, the second one is liberty. Liberty means freedom. So what kind of liberty the preamble speaks about? Liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship. So with respect to liberty, it is laid down in the Constitution in Part 3 in fundamental rights. So freedom of religion was laid down from Articles 25 to 28. And other freedoms are laid down from Articles 19 to 24, Articles 19 to 22, and from Articles 25 to 28 they speak about the freedom. So that is liberty. So the next one is equality. So equality of status and opportunity. It is laid down in the Constitution again in Part 3 from Articles 14 to 18. Articles 14 to 18 they speak about equality. So I told you that the Indian society in the past has never been an equal society. But we want to make the Indian society an equal society, and for this we have laid down in the Constitution of India in Part 3 and Part 4 all that is necessary to make the Indian society equal on all the planes, political, economic and social. That's about justice, liberty, equality. The next one is fraternity. So B.R. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly said, without equality, liberty will produce the domination of few over many people. And without liberty, equality will kill the initiative of the individual. Without fraternity, liberty and equality will not help in achieving national unity. So the idea of fraternity is very, very important to bring in unity and integration in the country. By promoting the concept of universal brotherhood, we can promote the national integration. So the idea of nation itself means the bond among the people of diverse cultures. This is possible only through building the concept of universal brotherhood. And again the preamble also speaks about protecting the unity and integrity of India. So the Constitution of India aims at protecting the unity and integrity of India by several means. One, I said, by having a parliamentary democracy, we are trying to share the political power. This keeps the country united. By having a federal constitution, we are trying to share the powers between the center and the states. This meets the aspirations of the people. This helps in protecting the unity of India. By having a secular nation state, we are promoting the unity. By single citizenship, we are promoting unity. By integrated judiciary, we are promoting unity. So there are several ways how the Constitution of India seeks to achieve the idea of protecting the unity and integrity of India. Then it is laid down at the end in the preamble about the day on which the Constitution of India was adopted and enacted, that is on 26th November 1949. Then, so this is the text of the preamble. This is the text of the preamble. So then, what is the significance of the preamble? So the preamble clearly spelled out the kind of state which the Constitution of India tries to build. The preamble speaks about the goals of the Constitution to be achieved. The preamble also speaks that the people are the source of authority for the Indian Constitution. So by implementing what is laid down in the preamble of the Indian Constitution, we can make our Indian democracy more sustainable and enduring. Then the next question before us is, we have explained all the terms in the preamble. Then the next one is amendability of the preamble. So can preamble be amended? So in Keshwananda Bharati case, the Supreme Court said preamble can be amended, but preamble can be amended in such a way that it doesn't destroy the basic features of the Indian Constitution. And accordingly, in 1976, through the 42nd Amendment, preamble was amended only once. The terms socialist and secular were added to preamble, and again the term integrity of the nation was also added in the preamble. So preamble can be amended, but what is the limitation? It can be amended without altering the basic features. The next one is it a part of the Indian Constitution? Initially the Supreme Court said, in Beriberi Union case, the Supreme Court said preamble is not part of the Indian Constitution, so it cannot be amended. But later on, in Keshwananda Bharati case, the Supreme Court said preamble is part of the Indian Constitution, so it can be amended. So that's it about the Indian preamble. So we'll continue the other parts of the Constitution in the next video. Thank you.